need more in the workplace. So wanted to give just a little bit of context about who I am and what my story is very briefly. But before I do that, I also just want to, acknowledge my privilege. It's most people in the world aren't so lucky to sort of spend time pontificating, thinking about how they can optimize their performance and all of that. So I just want to acknowledge that. I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about this topic. I'm really passionate about it. And I just encourage you all to acknowledge that privilege that probably you have as well. The other thing I'll say here is that I'm going to go through quite a bit of material. It's going to all be pretty science-based. I'm really a big believer in trying to provide tactics and tools that are driven by research. So I won't go too far into the science. I don't want to lose anybody. I also think it's not necessarily necessary. So, but that said, if you all want to go a little bit deeper, I'm happy to do that. We can talk about that in sort of the Q&A session. Speaking of what I'd like to do, I know we have about an hour and a half here today. I'm going to try and make this as interactive as possible. I like to think of it as like more of a workshop, not just me, the talking head, and really kind of taking action on what we're talking about. So if you have a pen and paper handy, that's really ideal. If you kind of want to keep things up in your head, that's fine too. But I'm just going to have some prompts, some questions to have you all think through again so that we can take action on this and not just talk about it, right? And on that note, there's a lot of material, like I said, so I'm happy to share the slides. I find that most people want to reference back to these, so happy to do that. So yeah, without further ado, let me jump in, in case it's relevant, my own personal story very briefly. I was in management consulting for many years in the DC area, so not too far from where some of you probably are. Yeah, just really kind of got burned out. Really worked really hard for about 12 years. Worked myself into the ground a little bit, and I started to have some health problems, mental health, physical health. I went through a divorce, and really just it caused me to kind of reevaluate my life. And during that process, I sort of found this work around performance and flow states, and just sort of how to optimize myself when I kind of reinvented myself into, I ended up being more entrepreneurial, started a couple of businesses. And now I do this work for all types of organizations and groups. So I'm really passionate about it. I believe in it. I spent some time getting certified on the topic. Believe it or not, there's a peak performance and flow certification out there that I've gone through where we get to go really deep and nerd out on all types of things going on in the brain and body. So anyway, that's how I ended up here. And Seth was gracious enough to bring me on to talk to you all today. So let's dive in. Again, we're focused on how to increase our creativity, motivation, and productivity today. And I want to give you some very tactical tips on how to deploy that into your daily work situation. So let's see if I'm on the right page. There we go. Okay. So just to get on really common operating terms here for a second. So when I talk about flow, right? First of all, everyone in this room has experienced flow, right? We just have a lot of different names for it, right? So a lot of people say, oh, I'm in the zone, right? Or, a lot of athletes will call it, I was just totally locked in, right? I was in the moment. Jazz musicians often call it, or musicians in general, in the pocket, right? So however you call it, what it is it's when we feel our best and we perform our best. And basically, it's what drives our attention into the present moment. So that could be, having a deep conversation. That could be fully absorbed in a sport or an activity. That could be playing with our kids, right? There's a lot of different ways that flow manifests. But I think one thing is for sure is that we all know we've experienced it. But the question is, how do we replicate it, right? How do we kind of control it? Because, it feels good. We want more of it. So one thing I also want to talk about is just to go a little bit more sciencey, if you will, is that flow is technically an altered state of consciousness. So when I talk about, what's going on in the brain, we're actually the neurochemistry in our brain is starting to pump in neurochemicals that help us focus, that help us perform at a higher level. Again, we can talk about that nerdy science stuff and what those chemicals are if it's helpful, but just know that it is truly an altered state. And again, it's kind of what we're all pursuing. I think hopefully don't need to convince people that it's something worth pursuing and that it feels good and that we tend to see good results from it, whether just feeling good, performing good. I like to say flow is what brings us alive, right? If you think about sort of your most meaningful moments in your life, they're often flow states, right? So I think it's worth taking an examined look at how do we harness this more into our lives. Now, one thing I do want to be really clear about is that we all kind of want to get out of our overly analytical, self-critical heads, right? I think all of us have limiting beliefs or stories that we tell ourselves about what we can do, what we can't do, and really that kind of limits us. We'll talk about mindset a little bit later, but one thing I want to drive home is just to show you how ubiquitous, how common flow is in our everyday world. We just may not realize that that's what it is. And so in the name of all of us kind of wanting to escape or get out of our overly critical heads, think about just a few industries out there that are obviously massive, right? So let's just go on this list on the left here, just as an example, right? You have movies, cinema, right? Clearly big industry. What do we go to movies for? To escape, right? To get into an altered state, right? To escape our minds. Obviously, substances, right? Alcohol, drugs, nicotine, whatever it is, those change our state. And actually are driving the same neurochemicals that flow induces as well, which is interesting. Sports, right? Activities, those things where we just drop in the moment and we just are absorbed in the thing, right? That is a flow state and obviously a big industry. Music, same thing, that changes our state, right? It helps us sort of drop in to an altered state. It helps us escape, helps us feel good. It drives the neurochemistry. Things like sex often are also clearly big in our lives and play a big role. And that's a classic sort of flow state moment with someone else. Gaming, also a really good example, right? So I thought it was kind of interesting if you really just take a step and look back, it's like, hey, this is a big part of our culture. And actually, there was a group that did a study that when they added all the sort of altered state economy industries together, it totals about 4 trillion a year in the US alone. So pretty big role in our lives, whether we recognize it or not. So I also just want to drive home that, flow for the most part has played a pivotal role in human achievement throughout history, right? So when you think about the most sort of like epic human achievements, things where we've really just, broken the barrier of what we thought was possible, whether it's music or science or athletics, the 4-minute mile, and the under 2-hour marathon, right? Like these types of things that were historically impossible really are driven by a high performance state like flow. So a lot of innovation, a lot of learning, a lot of creativity happens in this state. Now, I want to talk about this gentleman here for a second. So this is a gentleman, very complicated name, but very big impact on society. His name is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and he is a Hungarian-American psychologist out of the University of Chicago. And what he did was, and to name just one thing out of many things in the field of psychology, positive psychology, he ran probably the most comprehensive study on happiness and flow ever done. So literally hundreds of subjects And over the course of about 30 or 40 years of his career, his big thesis or his big conclusion was people who have the most flow in their lives are the happiest people on the planet. So clearly, this is something I just want to like really drive home that, this is worth paying attention to. This is worth looking at because obviously we all want to be more happy. We all want to be more productive. We all want to be more motivated, right? So that I think is really kind of tells the story. So I want to just talk about, again, we have a bunch of names for this thing called flow in the zone, right? So I want you to start to kind of think about maybe what those experiences have been for you. And I think it's kind of helpful just to understand, what are the characteristics of flow? So if you experience flow, what does that feel like, right? I'll just go through these really quickly, but some common reports of the experience talk about time dilation, right? Time slowing down or speeding up, right? I think a lot of people can relate to that instance. We lose the inner self critic. So we're no longer sort of wondering what we need to do in the moment. We just do it without thinking, right? That's a classic example of a flow state. We feel like we're in control. We're completely concentrated. Our action and awareness merge, so we know what's going on in the moment and we act accordingly, which is really interesting. And then, the experience is what we call autotelic, which is just a fancy way to say that ultimately the experience itself is the reward. Thing from your childhood that you really, truly it's one thing from your childhood you enjoyed. Probably the younger, the better. Okay, can we get a couple brave souls to just share their answers, please? And maybe just take yourself off mute, raise your digital hand, you can put it in the chat, whatever you prefer. But how, at least one brave soul.
I threw out that playing catch with a baseball and being in the woods or forest. I can remember being like 5 or younger and really enjoying that still to this day.
Awesome. Yep. Okay, great. Sports and nature. Yeah, very common. Yeah, those are really good ones, Seth. Anyone else want to share?
Mine are reading. I loved Harry Potter. It's like anytime I could read Harry Potter, I'd be happy. And board games.
And war games.
Board games.
Oh, board games.
Yeah. A lot of them did involve war, like Risk.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. Okay, those are very good examples as well, right? I think probably there's some Harry Potter fans in the room. That whole series, I think, really impacted a lot of people. And yeah, games, right? So we're going to talk about why that is. Now, thank you guys for sharing. Anyone else want to share before I move on here?
Yes, visiting my grandmother.
Yes. What was it about that?
Six of, well, she was raising 6 of my first cousins. And anytime I went there, it seems like she was always cooking something and something good. And I got a chance to really bond with those cousins.
That's great. Okay, so I'm hearing some food in there, which is always really flow inducing, right? A very rich experience. I'm hearing community, family, human connection, right? So that's great. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So let me kind of dissect what I'm hearing, right? And this is kind of an overwhelming slide, so I just want to acknowledge that. But if there's one thing you take away from this talk today, I would recommend it being this. And let me explain why. This, if we all acknowledge that we want more flow, right? I think we all can like say that, hey, this is something worth doing in our lives, getting more of. This is what I would call the recipe for flow. These are called the triggers, right? So these are the things, the activities or features that drive the neurochemistry of flow and get us into that state. Now, what's interesting, and just to make it really practical, let's take everything we just heard from those childhood experiences and just map it really quickly to this slide, right? Now, I'm going to look at the individual slot triggers first, but I think what I heard in there, especially the trips to grandma's house, are what I would call group triggers, right? So let me go through this really quickly. So Seth was talking about, baseball, throwing a baseball, right? Great example. And I believe in this so much that I would challenge anyone to talk about anything that they ever felt good, and you can map it back to this list. So truly, it is powerful. When you're talking about throwing a baseball, one, we're talking about complete concentration, right? If you go down this list on the left, you need concentration to catch the ball. So you're concentrated, you're focused, right? That is something that drives flow. You talk about unpredictability. Perhaps you miss the ball, or if you don't catch it, it's going to hit you in the face, right? You never know kind of exactly what's going to happen, or someone's going to throw a wild ball, right? Deep embodiment. We're using our bodies, right? Clearly, that's a big piece. For most people, usually flow is involved in some type of physical activity, right? Immediate feedback. Yeah, if you don't throw the ball well, you're going to know immediately, right? If you don't catch the ball, you're going to know immediately. Clear goals. The goal of the game, quote unquote, is to catch the ball and throw it back, right? So anyway, look at that. How many of those things just in that one activity are what's driving a flow state? Now, you talk about, let's say, I think it was Graham there, talked about, board games. Same thing, very similar list, right? You got to concentrate. Maybe it's even a new game and it's novel. So there's some novelty thrown into that. It's unpredictable. You don't know who's going to win. There's an objective. So there's clear goals in the game, right? So again, very good example. Being outside in nature, going back to what Seth said, a lot of the same things, right? Novelty. You see a new environment, right? Or you see something kind of bigger than yourself. So let me transition over to the group side, because I think that's really interesting, what was said about going to grandma's house, right? The food, right? That alone in itself is very pleasurable and worth dissecting. But what I want to focus on is the activity of sharing that with somebody else, right? So going to grandma's house and having, some familiarity, connecting on a human level through open communication with your cousins or your aunts and uncles, whatever it is, right? So turns out one thing I'll make clear is that group triggers are by far the most potent form of flow. And I always like to give the example, and I think spending time with family, loved ones, friends is a great example, but I always like to use the idea of a concert or a show, right? Think about, your favorite musician, whatever genre it is, if it's blues, rock, whatever, EDM, it doesn't matter. The idea is, let's say you go to a concert where you love the music, you know the words, and you're with 10,000 other people that are in the same boat. They know the words, they love the rhythm, they love that song. And those moments where your band is playing their best song and you're all jumping up and down and singing along, right? That is a very profound experience. And that is the epitome of group flow. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to get that in the workplace, because obviously we can't all go to rock concerts as a team, but there are ways to leverage group flow in the workplace. So we'll get to that. But hopefully this is helpful. Again, I'm happy to pass along this deck, and this slide is one you might want to revisit. Now, the previous slide was the recipe for flow. Now, there are also things that are the anti-recipe for flow, the things that block the experience. So I'm just going to cover these really briefly. In fact, I'm really just going to cover one, and that is distraction. Let's face it, we live in a very distracted world. Our attention span is completely shot. We're all very bad at focusing. It's just the current reality. And we all know the culprit. And there's probably others, but we all know that, like, there's a war out there for our attention. A lot of people are trying to get us to pay attention to what they're doing. And our attention is very fragmented because of that. We're going to talk a little bit more about that and some tactics to solve that. But just all to say that, again, flow, in order to achieve this experience, it's what drives your attention into the present moment. So you really have to be focused. You can't experience this state in a distracted place, okay? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the three kind of buckets that I thought I'd cover today, and that is creativity, motivation, and productivity. Again, hopefully there's some helpful, tactical, actionable things that you can take into your work lives. So I guess the first thing I'll say about creativity is that, sometimes we're probably like, well, is creativity really that important for my work scenario? Do I need to leverage that? One thing I'll say is maybe not. But what's interesting is one of the biggest research studies done about workforce engagement. So why are people engaged in the workplace? Creativity tops that list almost every year. That's done by Gallup and then the American Psychological Institute. The other thing that's interesting, they also talk about what are the top skills that employers want in the workplace, and creativity also tops that list. So kind of interesting, right? So hopefully that perked up your attention a little bit. It is relevant, right? Even if maybe just it doesn't seem explicitly relevant, right? Here's something really interesting. So again, this is a little sciencey, but we'll talk. Hopefully there's someone. Chandra Green is trying to enter the room. If you're able to let her in. So there was a really interesting study done by Dr. Andy Walsh. He actually is a neuroscientist hired by Red Bull. And you may be familiar with Red Bull, like all the crazy extreme sports stuff that they sponsor and that they do. But they, to their credit, they do a lot of research around performance. And they came up with this project called the Red Bull Hacking Creativity Project. They brought in scientists from MIT in Boston, some TED fellows, and then some scientists at Red Bull. And they did this massive creativity study. And they were asking themselves, how do we train creativity in the workplace? And I'll basically save you the details of a very, very long, comprehensive report. But the end result was really interesting, right? Is that, first of all, creativity is essential for solving complex problems. And if you think about it, most workplaces, most nonprofits, most organizations in general, that's what they're doing, right? We're solving problems for other people. That's why we're in business, right? So obviously solving problems is important. And if creativity is essential to that, it's also important, right? But here's what I want to focus on, is that the sort of conclusion of this big study was that we are really bad at training creativity. We train it as a skill, almost like, hey, you know what, you need to go learn Excel, or you need to learn this program to execute on your job, right? Or a CRM or whatever it is, right? You can't train creativity is what they're really coming to. And instead, what we need to do is be training a state of mind. And what that is basically we need to get people into flow. And so this is the way we should be approaching creativity. So again, I'm going to talk through some ways that I think are really effective in getting teams into flow. But again, here's the research telling us that this is the way we should be approaching it, not teaching it as if it was a skill. So another just super quick study here. This is really interesting. Again, it gets kind of nerdy, but I just want to kind of hone in on what flow can do, right? So there's another really interesting study at the University of Sydney. Don't worry about this picture of this guy with this thing on his brain. It's called transcranial magnetic stimulation. Basically, is what it does is helps put into your brain the electric signature to put you into a flow state, right? So it's basically an automated or mechanized way to get you into flow. Now, I'm going to focus on the things that are natural and that you don't need a machine to do it, but there is a machine out there that can help with it. And what was interesting about this study is that, has anyone ever seen this this game? It's called the 9-dot puzzle. What it is that basically you have to try to connect all of the dots, so all 9 dots, by using only 4 strokes of the pen and without taking the pen off the paper. Okay, so I don't know if you've ever seen this, but let me just get right to the punchline. It's very hard. Okay, now some people can do it, but well, under normal circumstances, fewer than 5% of people can solve this little puzzle. Okay, but what was interesting is that they had a study control group. And in this particular study, the control group was even worse than 5%. It was nobody could solve this problem. Then they put them on with this, they put this machine on their head, got them into flow, and had them do the same puzzle. And 40% of the people figured out the puzzle. Right? That's impressive. That's an 8x increase in performance. So the key finding here is that, you know, flow increases creativity upwards of 200%, which is pretty significant. And there's actually the Department of Defense, DARPA, has done similar studies for the Navy SEALs and some of these elite special forces groups because they want to get them into flow in combat situations, right? So if anyone's curious, this is how you solve the puzzle. And obviously you have to kind of literally think outside of the box, right? You have to draw the lines outside of the sort of sphere of those 9 dots, right? So pretty interesting, right? Kind of helps us be creative. And that this is sort of proof by the research. Now, I want to talk really quickly about what I would call cultures of innovation, right? So I don't know if anyone here does, you know, kind of adventure sports or anything like that, but I do, and I think it's really interesting because the adventure world is very, it's a great case study for flow states. You know, I put 2 pictures up here. If you can believe it, the top picture there, Cody Townsend, a gentleman, a pro skier, skied this line in Alaska. And, you know, pretty spectacular. You know, obviously there's no room for error. And so that is one instance where I think, you know, he clearly had the hardest.
Did he ski right in between those 2 cliffs?
That's right. Right down the middle. Yeah. So clearly that's another level of performance. You know, example that maybe some of you are a little bit more familiar with because it became part of the popular culture is Alex Honnold there on the bottom. If you saw the movie Free Solo a couple of years ago, It won an Academy Award for the best documentary. Very good film. His wife is actually my business partner, so I like to talk about his example because I know them well. But he basically climbed a 3,000-foot wall in Yosemite in California without a rope. As you can see in this picture, he's not using a rope in that picture. So clearly, extreme example of innovation, but these are things that have never been done before in human history, right? And so they're clearly pushing the envelope. And what I think is interesting is that if you look at this list, going back to that flow triggers, right? When I talk about the recipe, these triggers you can map every single one of these triggers back to what these people are doing, right? And so what happens is when you stack the flow triggers, it increases the experience of flow. And so it's just really interesting, right? So flow is obviously required in order to achieve these really high levels of innovation, right? One quick note on Alex, again, because I know him, in case it's of interest. I think what's interesting about what he did is if you think about, other sort of big achievements, just take the Olympics, for instance, right? Olympic sports, you think about, let's just talk about Michael Phelps or something for a second, right? So let's say Michael Phelps, most decorated Olympian of all time, clearly a very high performer, or Carl Lewis, whoever you want to use, right? They are very accomplished athletes, and they're pushing the levels, or Usain Bolt, whatever it is, right? They're pushing the levels of human performance. But what's interesting, I think, about what Alex did is that, in Olympics, let's take Michael Phelps, for instance, the distance between first and second place is 100th of a second, or a tenth of a second, or half a second, whatever it is, right? But what's interesting about what Alex did is that there's no one really even thinking about doing what he did. So you could call it crazy, but you could also just call it that he has some experiences that have led him to be able to do this. And what it was is that he was an only child, and he was very lonely as a kid when he started climbing, and he's kind of on the spectrum of I'm blanking. It's not Asperger's, right? Asperger's spectrum. And he was too shy to ask people to give him a belay, right? To protect him on a rope. And so he would just climb without a partner, without a rope from a very early age. And he just trained himself to be able to do that. So anyway, I thought that those cases were pretty interesting. Now, something that's probably a little bit more relatable, and just to, again, use one example, another culture of innovation. We talk about these entrepreneurial hotbeds, right? Like Silicon Valley, for instance, right? Same thing. Why is it that this place is pumping out all types of, really innovative products and solutions and ideas? Again, it comes down to these communities, and in this case, this place, like Raleigh. I think most of you are in North Carolina, right? Like Raleigh is a kind of entrepreneurial hotbed, right? UNC has a lot of, entrepreneurial activity. So you could make the same argument there locally. But the idea is that they're really good at designing their communities and environments to harness these flow triggers. So all to say that this isn't an accident. This is very much we can sort of dissect it and map it to the flow triggers. All right, so here's something that I hope is applicable. Now, I think we've all been in really super boring group meetings. And let's face it, sometimes those are necessary. In fact, probably most of the time they're necessary. But I think when there's an opportunity to specifically, if the goal of the meeting is to solve a problem or to think critically about something, what the organization needs to change or build a strategy, right? That's a really, really good opportunity to leverage some of these tips. And so I'm going to just walk through these really quickly. Again, happy to talk more about this in the Q&A. But one of the things that is really effective is doing something physical to start a meeting, even if it's virtual, right? Ideally, a lot of these happen in person. But if you're virtual, there's some opportunity as well. Like for instance, just take a short walk, go outside. Even if it's just walking inside or around the building or whatever it is. Again, we came up with the thought that, being physical is a very good thing to induce flow. There's this activity called priming where you breathe out and push your arms up. And then when you pull your arms down, you breathe in, right? And you just do this for about a minute. That is really good at changing your state, and you can do it real time. The other thing is breath work. You just take a couple of deep breaths and you'll change your state immediately. So do something physical. If possible, leverage novelty. Do something that you don't normally do. Again, like going outside, or maybe meeting at someone's house or a cafe, or just mix it up a little bit. That novelty can really help just make it less stale. Definitely. If it's a strategic type meeting and if it's focused on solving a problem, put away the devices, right? Put your phone on do not disturb or put it away. And let's face it, how many of us are on chat or instant message or Slack while we're going through a meeting? That is just not a good best practice if you want people to be engaged, right? So close your computers for a second, pull out the old-fashioned pen and paper, and pay attention to one another, right? That is key. I like to start with an icebreaker. What's a quick little prompt? What's the most interesting thing you've read, heard, or talked about recently? And most importantly, why? That gets people that lights people up, right? Because they're not talking about maybe something that's boring, that may be work-related, but that they're actually truly, genuinely, personally passionate about. Okay, so that's a really good prompt. Always identify a problem you're trying to solve, its root cause. What is, like, drilling down layers, peeling back the layers of the onion to understand what is the root cause of that problem, and then why the solution is important, right? That usually drives people's motivation to solve it. Make sure everyone is included, right? Even those that are a little bit more quiet, introverted, less subject matter expertise, whatever it is. Make sure everyone's included, get everyone's perspective, and use a technique that is often used in improv circles, and that is yes and. So if someone contributes an idea, it's never a bad idea. It's yes, and here's another idea, right? That really stacks creativity and gets people thinking outside the box. Okay. So I'm going to move to motivation, but I guess, are there any questions on creativity at all from the group here? Feel free to save them for after too, but just want to touch them real time if need be. Okay.
Jeremy, when you think about, like, all of us kind of manage our own days and our calendars,
yeah.
What should kind of the stuff you shared so far, what should we be doing and not doing around how we set up our calendars or our days?
Yeah, great question, Seth. And I actually talk about it later here in just a minute when I talk about specifically productivity. So yeah, definitely we'll come back to that. Okay, let's talk about motivation just for a minute here. So this is a very intense slide. I'm just going to cover it super quickly. Feel free to come back and reference it. But what I think is really interesting is that every flow state goes through a cycle, a 4-stage cycle. And I just want to highlight the fact that, when you enter a flow state or any type of flow experience, you start right? Now, again, I'm not going to focus too much on this, but I want to focus on one phase, and that is the struggle phase. And here's why it's important, is that most of us really struggle with being motivated as much as we'd like to be, right? I think we can all acknowledge that, like, we struggle, whether it's going to the gym or being active or getting this task done or procrastination or whatever it is. It turns out everything has sort of a struggle phase, right? Anything worth doing usually requires a little bit of work to get going, right? Think about, you decide you want to start going to the gym this week, and maybe you want to work out before work, or you want to go for a run. because you know you've done it and it makes you feel good. Now, the struggle phase of that is that you're going to need to put together your gym clothes or your shoes, and you're going to need to get in your car and drive somewhere or go do this like quote unquote work before you do the activity. And that part kind of sucks, right? So what I like to talk about is like hacking the struggle phase. And basically what that is just preparing yourself ahead of time to minimize that struggle. So in the case of going to the gym or running, what if you put out your shoes the night before and your socks and your gym clothes and your gym bag, and you establish the workout you're going to do, what route you're going to run, right? That really helps us minimize the friction to get that thing done. And we know that, you know, when we start to do it, we start to feel better. And that's this rest of this flow cycle, right? If you start to run, you're going to maybe feel not great for the first 5 minutes. And that's, you're entering that release phase. And then after 5 or 10 minutes, you start to feel great. And you're like, I feel like $1,000,000. This is great. I'm feeling great. That's the flow, right? And then of course you get tired and you have to recover. Okay, so that's just one example, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about the struggle phase. One thing I want to just drawing it back to Seth's comment is that, you know, scheduling these types of things can be really effective, right? So knowing that, for instance, if you want to start to work out this week, then, you know, putting that literally in your calendar. 7 a.m. I'm going to go to the gym. Well, 6:30 is when the work for that starts, right? So really being tactical about how you schedule your day. I'm going to, again, I mentioned the struggle hacks, is just knowing that, you know, it's always going to be frustrating, that struggle phase, but just knowing that you just need to push through it and that eventually you'll get to a place where it's enjoyable and rewarding, right? That's the goal. And that's the way to think about this. And you can reference back some of the techniques here. But I like to just talk about, you know, the clear goals, right? Just be very clear on what you're trying to achieve, and just know that you have to push through the hard part in order to get to the fun part. Okay. Now I'm gonna skip this this exercise around the passion recipe. If we have time, I'll come back to it. But I want to again just make this a little bit more interactive. Let me ask you all, just take again 30 seconds. What are you really curious about? Okay. So let me give you a prompt. If you had a weekend all to yourself, no family, no kids, no obligations, no responsibilities, just pure free time, and you had a pocket full of money, what would you do? Would you go to a movie? Would you go read a book? Would you go to a museum? Would you go on a trip? Would you do an activity? Right? If that's helpful, think about just for a second, what are you curious about? What's something that's like been in the back of your mind and you're like, I would really like to learn more about that? Anyone want to be brave again? Maybe some new folks? Naomi, Alicia, Jack, anyone listening that wants to chime in?
Yeah, I'll go. I put that I would learn more about myself, like just having time to reflect and actually learn more about things that I may be passionate about or things that I find joy in. I think that there's probably a lot of things that I would maybe be interested in, but because I have not taken the time to like explore what I think I'd be interested in, I don't know. So I think I would just learn more about myself. Like, yeah, what makes me happy? What am I wanting to be good at, or what am I not good at? Just like
Yeah, I love that, Naomi. So it's almost like what you're realizing is that you need some time to actually think about this, which is, I think, pretty common. We're all so busy, we just don't really know ourselves and know necessarily what we're curious about. I would encourage you to do this exercise and actually take some intentional time, Naomi. But if it's helpful, feel free to reach out and I can provide some guidance to do that. Like I think that's a really worthwhile exercise to be intentional about that. So I'm happy to be a resource if it's helpful. Anyone else want to share really quickly? We can have people who've already spoken too. I always encourage everyone to be involved.
I put in the chat, but I would, my first instinct would be to take a trip, but I would probably, on the theme of spirit of this, I would want to start, I've always wanted to write a book and actually have a lot of interviews done with my grandpa. So I would probably want to just like dedicate the time to figuring out how to get that project on track.
Amazing. I love that. Cool. Yeah. So trip, really, really good flowy type activity with that, you know, I think is always good to have in the toolkit. A lot that I think we can be curious about when we're in novel places, right? Things that just real time happen that we're like, oh, that's a cool shop. Let me go in it, you know, or whatever. Love the book idea. Again, happy to take that offline a little bit, Graham, if you need some help putting some structure to it. Just have some friends who help with that type of stuff. Okay, cool. Well, to make it again super relevant, I want to just hone this in just a little bit. What work task has made you feel completely engrossed in the past? Right. So this is kind of getting to our strengths. How do we harness our strengths in a more effective way? So kind of similar, but in the work environment. What at work has made you feel engrossed? I like to use the example of spreadsheets, right? Some people love spreadsheets, some people hate them, right? Sometimes people are building a spreadsheet, they're in it, and they just love, you know, that environment. Anyone want to talk about theirs?
Recency, working with others like Naomi and Graham and Vici to clarify our org chart and try to bring more clarity to like all the different stuff we're doing and try to eliminate some confusion. If I do that alone, it's harder. And when I do it with others, I can get just totally engrossed in it.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, usually working with others, ideating, bringing in ideas, sort of the group think, really much more effective, especially for a task like that. And most of us are pretty social. We like that sort of collaboration. So super good example. Anyone else have one?
For me, I thought it was interesting because I was thinking about the cycle. And for me, it's like the first thing that came to mind is when I'm working on a deck or any type of thing where I have like a blank canvas and I get to build it. But it's actually when there's a blank canvas, it's like the struggle phase is actually a lot longer. Like I procrastinate, I don't know where to start. But once I get into it, then I'm like, those are my favorite flow states.
Oh yeah, Graham, I can super relate. I mean, just building this deck, I would, you know, have the same experience, right? So totally, right? So one tactic, right, would be maybe to storyboard or to outline, right, to kind of minimize that struggle phase so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. You're just looking at a blank slide, right? Like, what are the key ideas you want to make sure, or use a template for like, you know, the skeleton of the slide deck. You know, slide 1 will be this. You know, slide 2 will be this. That gives you a little bit of structure and helps you kind of cheat that struggle phase a little bit. Yeah, good one. Cool. Well, so the idea here is that, you know, so many of us in the workplace are sort of not leveraging what we're really good at or that we're drawn to because of our job description or whatever. So I always think it's a really good best practice to help as an organizational leadership, Seth, or whoever else, is to help people think through, you know, what are the things that make them feel engrossed? And where possible, let's try to leverage that more into the day-to-day, right? So in Graham's case, yeah, decks are great, right? Like that seems, and in your case, Seth, you know, working in the team sort of ideation type setting, right? So finding what people's strengths are, and I think this is a good exercise to identify what that is, and then trying to find a place within the work description or the day-to-day to leverage that more effectively, because you're drawn to that thing for a reason, right? It's just what naturally you gravitate to or fills your cup on some level. So we should do more of it. And that's a flow state, right? So hopefully that's helpful. Okay, I want to get into the last part here, and then I want to definitely open it up to have it. You know it or not, Facebook, Instagram, all the same company. Literally, some of the highest paid scientists and specifically neuroscientists on staff. There's literally a room of people around thinking about how they can pump more dopamine into their apps so that they make it more addicting. I'm not kidding, right? So there's a lot of intention and design, the apps and the technology that we interact with on a daily basis. There's a reason why we keep wanting to go back to Instagram. There's a reason why we scroll, and novelty is the name of the game. But just know that you're losing this battle, right? And that's okay. It's not your fault. But there's some really cool tactical ways to help with this. I think what's interesting about this slide, if you look on the left, back in 2011, there were around 150 marketing softwares. And of course, marketing is what's trying to get to you, get your attention, because attention is king, right? Think of that in just, what is that, 12 years? In 2023, there's 11,000 marketing softwares now trying to vie for your attention, right? So these attention mechanisms are very powerful. There's this always on permanent availability, incessant distraction that is just becoming the new normal, right? You just have to look around and see how many people just can't stay off their phones. And let's face it, your phone is a big culprit, right? The problem is so bad that it is literally changing the fundamental nature. Fascinating, right? There's a study done from the American Psychological Institute that showed incidents of people hurting themselves because they're so distracted by their phones. And think about this for a second. We're so distracted that we're literally walking into walls and into traffic and hurting ourselves. And think about all the incidents that probably weren't recorded, but across hospitals in the US, there were 5,000 incidents just last year, right? This is people physically hurting themselves because they're so distracted. Like, if you think about that for a second, that's just insane, right? Like, we're so distracted, we injure ourselves. That's to me mind-boggling. A couple other things. There's a really great book called The Distracted Mind. A couple concepts he talks about in here that we might all probably can relate to. There's this idea of nomophobia, fear of being without a mobile phone. So think about when we're getting in the car, we're taking off, and we're like, oh shit, I forgot my phone. Yeah, it's like a panic, right? That comes over us. We're very, study talked about adults. I would say this is probably much higher, actually, and I think it spans just young adults. I think adults also suffer from it. Phantom pocket vibration syndrome. Has anyone ever felt this, where your phone's not even in your pocket, but you felt a buzz anyway? How interesting is that, right? So 100% of young adults claim to have that. Anyway, there's a couple other things that I think are interesting and kind of spell out. But one thing that actually was a recent study that I didn't put on this is that the average knowledge worker, so the average office worker, does 11 minutes of focused work per day. 11 minutes. Now that's the average, right? Like, so maybe some of you are better and some of you may be worse. But if you think about it, between people coming up and talking to you, Slack, email, right? The average person checks email 56 times an hour. We're all like addicted to the, like, just did something else come in? Oh, we're doing this task. Oh, wait, did something else come? Really just want to make really quickly, I also think is interesting. We've all heard about ADHD, attention for. Now there's even a new designation, upwards of we're all sort of, we're all in it. So I want to take just again a second. I want you to come up, and it can be just one thing, or if there are multiple things that you know are just your biggest distractors, just let's take 30 seconds. What are your biggest sources of distraction? You want to start shouting out some culprits?
I said looking for any distraction when I'm in the struggle phase, and like random Google News searching, or like mindlessly picking up or cleaning stuff around the house.
Good. All right. Yeah, I think we all can relate to that. Absolutely. Anyone else?
I think kind of like you said earlier, Jeremy, sometimes you get distracted from a big task by a little task where you're like, oh, I can just finish that, and then you never get back to the big task.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, again, very common. I think we're just all just sort of like in this hyper distracted phase. And if we think about something while we're engaged in something else, a lot of times we'll just let ourselves go and be distracted in that, right? So we'll talk about that here in a second. Okay, I'm surprised no one's talked about just specifically their phone. But yeah, I think whether you acknowledge it or not, it's obviously, again, a big elephant in the room. Let me just segue and talk about what I would call some really low-hanging fruit around how to practice distraction management. Now, this is tailored to specifically work environments. So let me just go through these really quickly here. So obviously, putting away your phone or putting it on Do Not Disturb is super, super effective. It's going to be hard, right? Putting your phone out of sight is what I would recommend, even if it's just in your bag or in a drawer. And it doesn't have to be all the time, but certainly if you're trying to get something done by a deadline, or you want to be creative, or you want to drop into flow and be engaged in what you're doing, you need to put your phone away, right? There's just no two ways about it. So that's a really big one. Disabling notifications and instant messaging on your computer. So if you all have Slack or Microsoft Teams or whatever, obviously that's a key part of being productive and getting stuff done. But I think what I like to try to do is get leadership involved and help them understand the importance of deep work, of actually focusing on a task, because that's where your best work happens. So talk to your supervisor or your team about, putting that instant messaging on quiet mode for an hour, right? At a time. That's all it takes, is just an hour at a time, right? Or maybe it's even 30 minutes. Whatever you need to do, that's a big source of distraction. Now, I think most of us are really guilty of having a lot of browser tabs open at any given time. I basically let it go until I need to restart my computer because it doesn't work anymore. I think we're all guilty of that on some level. You got to close those tabs down. Really just focus on what you're working on, whether that's a program or an internet browser or whatever. Tidy up your environment. So we're often kind of distracted by what's on our desk or what's in front of us. So if you tidy that up and just make it less distracting, that can be really, really effective. Your environment is really key. Working with headphones on, again, this is especially if you're either at home like me with 2 kids under 2. I often work with headphones in because I don't want to be distracted by my crying 5-month-old. If you're in the office, you know, people just walking by wanting to chat, that's great. Like, have a social moment, but also when you're in the zone, when you're trying to get something done, just let people know, hey, you know what? Just point to your ear. I'm busy. I'm working, right? And there's a great couple of resources that I'll offer. There's this great website called brain.fm, and it just plays music that actually helps you get into flow. And it's really effective. So I highly recommend something like that, where you just you're engrossed in music that's for concentration, for focus, and you try to limit distractions from other people or other things. And like I said, let your coworkers know that you're flowing, that you're busy and you're in a focused state, right? So I think these are really effective things. The other thing I would add to this, to your point, Graham, if you think about something while you're doing a task, don't just go do it, just write it down, right? Write it down so that you won't forget, you won't like ruminate in your brain about forgetting that thing. You know you wrote it down, you know you can come back to it later. Just focus on the task at hand, okay? So I think that those are some really helpful tips, I think. Now, Seth, this is kind of where we were going with this calendar idea. And I want to talk about just a couple of things here. So this is my calendar. It's a little dated at this point, but it's still, I use the same technique. Again, this is probably more than most people need to go. I literally map out my week kind of hour by hour and based on my energy levels. So, you know, for instance, on the left, you see sort of like, you know, 5 to 6 a.m., 6 to 7 a.m., 7 to 8 a.m. And I do this on a physical piece of paper and with a pencil because I find often my priorities change. So I like to kind of just erase it and put something else in, right? But the color coding, if you're interested, so the red is when I know that I'm not going to be in a good state. I'm tired, I'm waking up. And so I'm going to be intentional about scheduling something in that time to just get me awake and going, right? So I call that prime up. I do a little bit of meditation, I drink some coffee, and I read a little bit, right? That helps me kind of get ready and elevate my state and wake up and get into a productive place. Now from 6 to 7, I focus on my MIT, which is my most important task for the day. I find that in the morning, that's when I'm the most productive, I'm the most focused. So that's really effective for me. Again, this is probably way too much if you're just starting this, but I just wanted to show you an example of what one way to approach it. Now from 7 to sort of 10, those are my core working hours. I know that my energy is still high and I have a lot of motivation to work. So that's why it's green, is because I know I want to put my high impact activities into those times and make sure I'm getting the things that are really important done. Now, as I go throughout the day, I'm not going to go through this in total detail, but you'll see just like between 1 and 3 p.m. after lunch, I get really tired, right? I think that's pretty common. A lot of us will lose motivation early in the afternoon. Don't schedule important things during that time. You know, maybe it's just more email. I think one really effective tool, Seth, going back to that calendar blocking idea, is, you know, ideally, maybe you can block times to answer emails instead of checking it 56 times an hour. You know, schedule it in maybe once, 2, 3 times a day, and you know that that's your email block, right? So that is a really, really effective way to start to limit distraction and to help you get more strategic work done. So anyway, I don't know if this is helpful, but this is sort of my method. And again, I'm happy to share this with you. So you can revisit it. Now, one thing I think is really helpful is what I would call the power down and the power up ritual, meaning that really to set yourself up for a day of a productive work, it starts the day before. So power down ritual is something that I do the night before. So at the end of my workday, I calendar in my power down, my prime down ritual. right? It's a sort of 5 to 6 time frame. And I ask myself, okay, tomorrow, what is my most important thing that I want to get done, right? And then I'm going to go to tomorrow. So today is Wednesday. I'm going to go to tomorrow, Thursday, and I'm going to say, my most important task tomorrow is XYZ thing, and write it down so that I know what I'm going to execute on when. That is really effective. Be really specific about what your goals are, right? What are you doing, like I said, and why are you doing it, right? If you need help with motivation, this is a really effective thing. Establishing clear goals, right? Why am I doing it? Why does it matter? What can it help me unlock? If I do this thing, what will be better, right? That can be really effective to helping you be motivated about it. And of course, identifying what the thing is. And then if I have some time, I'll talk about this idea of the challenge skills balance. But let me come back to that if I have time. Now, in the morning, powering up the ritual. So really starting to stack your day with the things that, get you going and feeling productive. Again, for me, if you can kind of see over here on the right-hand side, you can see my prime up is, I drink some coffee. I always try to drink some water. I read, I do some breath work. Sometimes I'll do some meditation. And then often what I'll do is just journal something that I'm grateful for. And that's all within like the first hour or so, right? Again, that might be too much, but even just starting with one of those things, maybe I do some breath work when I first wake up. The important thing is if your go-to is to wake up and pull out your phone and start to scroll through your email, or even worse, scroll through social media, wake up, y'all. That is really not a good practice. Please, I take it back. The most important thing of this presentation is not the flow triggers. That's the second most important thing. The most important thing is that if you're pulling out your phone first thing in the morning and being reactive instead of proactive about what other people want you to think is important, that is a huge low-hanging fruit. And I promise you'll get a lot out of just not looking at your phone for the first hour. Instead, try to think about things that are actually good for you. So Naomi, maybe it's spending the first hour of your morning drinking coffee and actually spending some intentional time about things you're curious about, right? Maybe it's journaling. What are you grateful for? These things can be really impactful. We just need to be a little bit more intentional about the way we design our days. So anyway, there's some other things in here that I think, again, you can revisit. And then here's this idea of tuning the balance. I'm going to come back to that. I think the questions will really probably lead us there anyway. But the last exercise I have, and then I want to open it up to questions, is just simply, and I'm going to just sort of pose this and you guys can revisit it later. But I find that one of the most effective ways to leverage flow is just to think about it as play. What is it that you like to do that you would consider play? And make that what I would call your primary flow activity. And if you have a secondary flow activity, then you can establish that too. Meaning, what is that thing that you know will bring you alive 9 times out of 10 when you go do it? Identify what that is. And if you're feeling stuck, unmotivated, unproductive, distracted, drop what you're doing and try to go do that thing, right? One thing I want to really drive home is that the more flow you get, the more flow you get. So whether it's outside of work or inside of work, let's just say it's outside of work. Let's say for me, I live in the mountains. I like to go mountain biking. That for me is a really effective tool to help me get into flow. That's like my primary flow activity. In the winter, it's skiing or spending time with my kids, right? I know that that will work for me. So if I spend intentional time scheduling that into my calendar and being really intentional about doing those things, I'm going to feel more flow while I do that thing, but I'm also going to feel more flow and drop into flow much easier when I'm at work, right? This is a very effective way to just build more flow and just have overall more well-being in our lives. Okay. So I'm going to leave you with that. Just think about what are your flow activities? What are your go-to things? Do more of them. Pretty simple. Okay. I want to leave just with a quote that I think is really, really powerful. Howard Thurman is a civil rights leader. really great quote that I just absolutely love. Don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive. Because what the world needs more is more people who have come alive. Isn't that the truth? Right? If nothing else motivates you, let this. Okay? That's all I had, y'all. Let's stop there and just see what questions you have. I'm happy to revisit anything. But I'd love to hear kind of overall impressions, questions, criticisms, you name it.
I feel like I've been talking first a lot. Naeem, any thoughts or reactions on your end?
I don't know if we heard your name. You got cut off a little bit. Who were you asking that to?
Oh, it was just checking Naeem, seeing what he thought.
I think he's frozen for me.
Oh, yeah, he's kind of frozen, yeah.
Go. Yeah, I'll go last.
I also feel I've been talking a lot, but to Phil, I was gonna say I like my biggest takeaway probably is gonna be the power down ritual, because I feel a lot of this stuff I kind of knew, but it was good to have tactics to overcome it. And the biggest one that I don't think I do that I should do is
Okay, what was that?
Oh, go ahead, Naeem.
Yeah, I think he's cutting out pretty good, frozen up.
Oh, I can see you now, Naeem.
Shoot, the tech. I hate when the tech limits us. I want to finish your thought, Graham.
Yeah, sure. So I was gonna say the biggest thing I should do that I don't do is like set up my next day for success at the end of my current day. And then I just had one other thought, which is that I feel like some of the things that put me most in flow state are also dangerous, because it's like they're really addictive, like strategy video games. So I like the idea of finding other things like walking or something like that that's a little bit less addictive, that can put me in a flow state. Because if I was like, oh, I'm gonna go play this game for 20 minutes and then I'll be in a flow state and then I'll do my work, it would be like 6 hours later before I actually do my work. So it's a interesting tactic to be refined.
Yeah, it's a good example, Graham. And what I would just recommend is, try to give yourself maybe set a timer, and I think that, just understanding that, that that's addicting, and that, you have an inclination to spend probably more time on gaming than you should or whatever. But that it plays a valuable part in your life. And so maybe just being, putting some structure around it can be really effective. And I would actually argue absolutely that if you played for 30 minutes and stopped and went and did your work, you'd be in a really good place to do work. Yeah, but the physical stuff is really good too. Yeah, to your point around walking. Anyone else?
I'd say similarly to Graham, the power down rituals, I think is something that I do already, but I do it like later in the evenings. I think in looking at your calendar, how you said you're most productive from 7 to 10 in the morning, I find like night hours for me to be like highly productive. I'm not sure why, but that's just, I know that about myself and I accept it. So breaking out those times to do my winding down ritual, but I am definitely like somebody who is very distracted by their phone. And so I actually do keep my phone on do not disturb because of the number of notifications I get. And it's less of like notifications that engage my like interaction, but it's just right looking at them. Like my doorbell and like my driveway cameras go off like every 5 minutes. So it's like, that notification's happening every 5 minutes. My email notifications, my Facebook notifications, my Instagram notifications, like, so it's more just like dinging constantly. So I keep my phone on do not disturb. and only have approved people that can contact me. Otherwise, everything waits until like I engage with it, if that makes sense. Like until I go look at all my notifications.
Perfect sense. That's great. Yeah, notifications are the big no-no, right? Like that's just, there's no reason to have, social media notifications on, right? Like just we'll get to that, schedule time for it. Don't let it fragment your attention, because it's not just when you're trying to get something done that's important not to have notifications. It's actually that your brain is being hijacked and wired to, that's why we have a hard time focusing for more than 5 minutes, because we all are just so trained to be like, oh, what's this shiny thing over here, right? So we have to kind of retrain our brains, but you can absolutely do it. It just is like a muscle. You have to kind of exercise it. So notifications are a great way, Naomi, to absolutely, combat that and to keep that in check. I love what you said too about what are your prime hours? Yeah, it's very individual, right? For me, it's morning. It sounds like for you, it's night. It doesn't matter as long as you know yourself well enough to say, okay, this is the time that I want to do a little bit of planning, or that I know that are my high output go-to times because I know my body, right? That's what he is. Don't feel like you have to do morning or night, right? It's just up to you.
Graham and Naomi, tell me if this is not helpful. Jeremy, I'm curious, any advice on kind of the puzzle piecing between our individual calendars and the overall team calendar? Like at times we've mentioned ideas of how can people have the flexibility to do individual work at whatever time's best for them, but then find some norms around like, here's where we're doing group work or meetings or stuff like that. But we haven't really 100% landed on like an updated calendar. I think maybe some of the stuff from your presentation we'll take back as a group to try to make sense of.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's a super important question. What I would recommend is, well, first of all, be really, strategic about group meetings. I think, it sounds like you all are pretty good about it, generally speaking, probably much better than some workplaces. Let's face it, we waste a lot of time in meetings that are just like someone thinking out loud, and there's really no objective, and right. So I think just looking at meetings and say, is this really necessary? It can even just be in itself a really rewarding exercise. If it is important and it is there's a goal and there's clear outcomes from a meeting, then great, have the meeting. But try to schedule it, and it's hard, again, lining to everyone's individual schedules, but try to do it at a time when people are most motivated, and where if it's really actually an important thing you're trying to achieve, instead of just mindless meetings, then do it at a time when people can contribute ideas and they're their best selves, right? So if most people are like Naomi and it's like later in the day, great, do it later in the day. Run a poll. If it's earlier in the morning, great, then most people are early in the morning, do it then. So I think that's one thing. The other thing I'll say is like, just making sure that on an individual level, you all are scheduling times to do your best work, to be productive, and to be very specific about what you're trying to achieve. And making sure distraction is managed, because I think that's the biggest win, like easy win to get out of. Alone is going to be kind of know that it's coming. It's almost like you have a vacation coming up and you like to look, like so much of the fun is looking forward to it. It's sort of the same concept, right? You know that you're going to work on this thing on Tuesday at 12, then great, it's coming. Your sort of unconscious mind will start to think through how you're going to approach it, why it's important, what do you think it'll do for your organization or for you, right? Those are really effective ways. And of course, just try to align where you can the group goals with the individual goals. I think that's a really good best practice too. Hopefully that's helpful. And sorry, I wasn't seeing the chat in my presentation. So I was seeing a lot of activity here with the chat. I'm so sorry that I missed all that. Some really good banter in here. Um, but I'm happy to revisit those or just see if there are any other questions.
Naomi or Graham, anything else in closing for us as like a team that you think we should take away or?
Not really beyond what you said.
On my end.
Good thing.
I was just saying I don't have anything on my end.
I think it would be good if we could coordinate on deep work days, my only thing, which I know we're working on. So if we could get like 1 or 2 on the calendar that everybody is just, or focus days or whatever you want to call them, that would probably help our efficiency.
Graham, I love that. I would highly recommend that, right? Like, yeah, even if it's not full days, if it's just even like a half a day, or it's like deep work blocks throughout the week, right? Like as an organization, we know that, you know, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday morning from 10 to 12 is deep work time. That's when we turn off instant messaging. That's where we're focused on what are our strategic goals as an organization. And that's when we're doing that work, right? Or whatever it is. But just applying distraction management, having group norms and expectations, knowing that that time exists and putting it on the calendar. Dude, that you guys are doing that, you are so well above like a lot of organizations. I love that you're even thinking about that, but I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, because currently it's like I might put a deep work block on a Wednesday. Now we might have one on a Thursday. Vici might have one on a Friday. And Graham, you're saying like, how could we better align? And I'll say, let's do this as our shared deep work block.
Yeah. And we do have our deep work blocks. So those is a good start. It's like, I think we're all on like 2-hour blocks twice a week or so, but if we could make maybe whole days, one whole day or something like focus day, that would be good.
That's helpful.
Graham, you're even using the language of the industry, right? Like if you haven't read Cal Newport's Deep Work, I've got a version that's like tabbed up, and this is like a Bible type situation. So if you don't have this book, if you haven't looked at it, at least the leadership should take a look. It's really nice. He also wrote a book called Digital Minimalism. Actually, let me just put that in the chat. So it's Cal Newport. He's a professor at Georgetown. It's called Deep Work.
Cool. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Can you share the slides so I can share them with everyone here?
Absolutely. Well, absolutely share the slides. And then Seth, you asked me to create just a little sort of post-event survey. I'll just put the link in here for you if you all want to note that down. Just to get some feedback. If you put your email in there, I can send out the deck to everybody. So feel free to leverage that.
Jeremy, looks like you or whoever's in charge of that form has to just open it up to people that aren't in the organization. This has happened many times before, so just
I hate this.
Like
I hate this. Maybe can I screen share really quickly, Graham, and you can help me with this?
Yeah, I always forget where it is. I think Naomi knows better than me. But
in settings.
Yeah.
Under
settings.
No, settings across the top. So questions, responses, settings. Yep. And then under responses, drop down. And then I don't know why they default that, but uncheck the defaulted restrict. And then it should let. Oh. And then if you hit reload, it should let everyone rock and roll. Yep.
All right. You guys, did it work?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks for that heads up.
Cool.
All right.
Well, thanks so much, Jeremy. Thanks everyone for being on.
I can, yeah. thank you all for paying attention. And if I can be a resource on any of this, let me know. I love to nerd out and talk about this stuff. So please don't be a stranger.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Jeremy. Bye.